PixelSift is proudly supported by the Murdoch University School of Arts, and they might have what you're looking for in a creative degree. If you're keen to learn more, have a look at murdoch.edu.au/arts to find out what they've got on offer. That's murdoch.edu.au/arts, or you can search Murdoch University for more information. Murdoch University School of Arts proudly supports PixelSift.
PixelSift.
Hello and welcome to episode 142 of PixelSift, the show dedicated to indie games from around Australia and the world. My name is Daniel, and with me tonight is my co-host Gianni. Thanks for joining me, Gianni.
Hey Daniel, how are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Very, very good. Very excited to learn more about a whole bunch of topics on the podcast tonight.
Definitely. And our guest this week is Ron Curry, who is the CEO of Interactive Games Entertainment Association, or IGEA for short. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Ron.
Yeah, no worries at all. Great to be here.
But before we get into that, Gianni, what are we having a look at?
We're going to talk about a service called, by Nvidia, it's called Geforce Now. It's a live streaming service, which means that you play the games that you own, but you play them over the internet rather than installing them on your machine. But there's been a little bit of questions around the way that the service has been rolled out, and some developers have asked to have their games removed. So we'll find out more about that.
All right, let's get into it.
Australia's best video game podcast.
Subscribe to PixelSift on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever podcasts are found.
Well, it's 2020, and you might be asking yourself, what is the future of games? We've had, in the last week or so, the announcement of the specs, the hardware for two new game consoles, the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. But a big part of that future could be streaming. It could be a subscription service that you play to access over the internet, and maybe those consoles may not be as integral to playing games. Now, Geforce Now is a service that's not brand new. It's in fact been around since 2015, but it allows people to stream games over the internet to a device called the Nvidia Shield, which is basically a streaming box that you plug into your computer. Now, over the years, they've expanded that service's capability, and you can actually stream games that you own through your Steam library or other libraries across the internet to anywhere on your phone, wherever. It's kind of had a big sort of public launch in the last couple of months in the United States, but it hasn't gone as smoothly as some would say, hasn't it, Daniel? There's been a few roadblocks along the way.
Yeah, a few different publishers and companies have pulled out of Geforce Now. One of them that's notable is Activision. So apparently there was a misunderstanding between the two companies, and Activision has pulled out as Geforce or Nvidia thought that they were going to stay on from the trial period and extend into the full license. And because of that, shortly after, Bethesda has also pulled out. And even another one is Raphael van Lierop, who's the founder of Hinterland Studio, also announced that The Long Dark was actually being removed from the Now streaming service. So from a statement, he says, "Sorry to those who are disappointed. You can no longer play The Long Dark on Geforce Now. Nvidia didn't ask for our permission to put the game on the platform, so we asked them to remove it. Please take your complaints to them, not us. Developers should control where their games exist. They offered us a free graphics card as an apology, so maybe they'll offer you the same thing." So, Gianni, what's your take on all of this going on at the moment?
I think it's an interesting sort of direction that the games industry is heading towards. It's something they sort of hinted at when the Xbox One was initially launched, that they were going to lean heavily into cloud services and use that as the expansion. I think if you cast your mind back several years when the Xbox One was announced, they actually said that you would buy a game once and it would be attached to your account and it would move around with you, kind of hinting at that link to sort of a more account-based service rather than discs. And for example, the Xbox One even went to a version called the all-digital edition, which had no disc drive at all. And while you did purchase games, there's also the service called the Xbox Game Pass, which is a subscription-based game access service, and there are more and more of those appearing. Now, Ron, I'm curious about, I guess, what you see as the future of these sort of subscription gaming services in terms of accessing these games for people to play?
Yeah, look, it's really interesting, and I think if we kind of rewind a number of years, we saw I guess, the tension between home video, for example, and places like Netflix, even way back when we were posting discs out to people, and just kind of that how we moved along that evolution until today. Netflix is, we can't imagine life without Netflix or Stan or different sort of catch up TVs. And I think it's kind of inevitable that that's the way media is going. Music's gone that way, film's gone that way, books are going that way. It's no reason why video games shouldn't go that way. But I guess we're at the pointy end of that, where there's this collision of a new business model, a new sort of technology, where people are experimenting with commercial ways of exploiting their product outside of that, and kind of it's that perfect storm at the moment. So I'm not surprised we've got this tension around what's happened with Nvidia. I think it's a path that the industry is going to go down, and I'm not saying the industry is going to go down there. This will be the only way that we're going to access games, but it certainly is going to be another model for accessing all sorts of entertainment product.
So this actually leads me into my next question, but Ron, what do you think would need to happen to drive more consumers to the service? Do you think things like exclusive games and rewards are enough to incentivize people to switch over?
I think the first thing, let's move content to the side for a moment. And I guess the first thing we need is reliable connectivity and I guess a broadband system that we know is reliable and affordable and ubiquitous and doesn't have lag. That'd be lovely. I mean, that's the first thing we'd have to be. Maybe games need to change a little bit. If you consider that we may have a lag problem, we may have a connection problem, then perhaps the style of game we're playing will need to change a little bit around that streaming. But in a perfect world, I can't see why we would need to change any sort of game. We should be able to enjoy, whether it's a first-person shooter, whether it's action adventure, whether it's a game of FIFA, something like that. But in the perfect world, they all should be available in the streaming system.
Do you think there's an opportunity? There's been a huge success of Nintendo Switch, which is a handheld console that a lot of people are using to play games now, and potentially using access to this sort of like streaming service. Maybe it's run by Steam, maybe it's Microsoft, whoever it is, to access some really high fidelity games in a much more handheld sort of format.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing people enjoying gaming on the move. We know that everyone's doing, they're doing it on their phones, but certainly they're doing it on their Switch. And if you could deliver, much more content, high fidelity, less lag, the piece of hardware, whether that's the Switch or whatever device you're using, if that doesn't have to be the memory bank for the game, then look, it's amazing. That's a great world if you think about it. The connectivity, the engagement, the online ability to just play a game against anybody, similarly to what you're going to do sitting at home on whatever console you got or on your PC, but doing it in a more transitory nature.
I do wonder, Ron. We have seen the sort of success of the subscription services where the game is actually still delivered as a download, like the Xbox Game Pass, and a number of Australian-made games like Dead Static Drive are now going to go to that platform. We've had Hollow Knight as well go to that platform. Do you think that's a good middle step until the technology reaches the point where it is able to stream games across the internet to everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly gives some opportunities for game developers to choose. And I think we started off having this comment, you started this in the intro, is allowing game developers to choose their distribution model and their distribution path and that channel to the market. And if this is another way that it bolsters that and lets them reach in and have their product exposed to people, and we've seen some great successes. Hollow Knight is an awesome success there, an example, I should say. Then yeah, absolutely, that's a great first step.
And do you think there's any challenges that that developers might need to think about potentially if they are signing themselves up to be part of one of these services?
Yeah, I guess if this is the kind of top of head stuff, but the first thing is we don't know what these services look like, whether they'll be incredibly successful or not. And I guess it's just being cautious that you don't, give away the whole farm at the outset before you really know what you're doing. Maybe take a little cautious step about either the amount of, the longevity of the time you're allowing your product to be exploited or the width. we've seen different in other parts of the media where someone has surrendered their rights for music, for example, and all of a sudden was like, well, I didn't understand Spotify, and I didn't understand you were giving it away to YouTube, and I didn't understand you were giving it away to movies. It's just ensuring that you've kind of got your content and your IP locked down, and maybe just being a little bit cautious about what the future looks like.
See, one thing that I'm really curious to see how this evolves and unfolds is if there are any games as a service that goes on this subscription model. And as you know, with Netflix, for example, they have different movies in and out of rotation all the time. What would that look like if a certain game that was a games as a service, and so, heavy online multiplayer focus suddenly went off and a bunch of people couldn't access the game anymore? I wonder if that would be a consideration to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. That wouldn't be cool at all. And it is, so that's where it is quite different to a linear experience like a film or a TV series. You watch the TV series, you're done. You might be emotionally invested in it, but that's about it. If it's a game, like you're saying, and you're invested in a whole bunch of hours playing this game, investing in the relationships that happen within an online game. I don't think that's as easy as just switching it off and flicking it out somewhere else. So, have to give a lot of consideration to what that looks like.
Speaking about that, I mean, most of these services aren't available in Australia. There's no access to these. Do you think when do you realistically think that we in Australia, with the infrastructure we have, will be able to access sort of cloud streaming game services?
It doesn't matter what answer I give here, I'm going to get myself into trouble. Look, I have no idea. The national broadband network we have now is, if you ask me, and a lot of the people ask me to, is not fit for purpose, in spite of what the government have told us, as we're all working at home at the moment and streaming our meetings and playing games and watching more content than we normally would. The system is certainly under a heavy load, and I can't see that fixing itself in the near future.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to end the topic there. And coming up very soon, we're going to be chatting to Ron Curry about the recent merger between IGEA and the GDAA.
Hey there, if you're enjoying the show and you want to hear more, subscribe to Pixel Sift on Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, or listen on pixelsift.com.au. See you there.
So today we're joined by Ron Curry, who is the CEO of Interactive Games and Entertainment Association, and we are here to chat to him about the recent merger between IGEA and Game Developers Association of Australia, or GDAA for short. For those of us who don't know, the IGEA and GDAA are major bodies representing game developers and development within Australia. Ron, my first question is, how long has this merger been in development?
Probably a few years. The conversation, the serious conversation's probably been going for 2 or 3 years. The collaboration between us has been going a whole lot longer than that. If you stretch back to 10 years, I guess, you'll see submissions to government and representations and lobbying to government where it was both IGEA and GDAA, hand in hand, doing the submissions or facing up to government or having those conversations. So it's kind of been by osmosis over 10 years. The serious conversations, I guess, started about 2 to 3 years ago, and they kind of ramped up over the last 6 months, those conversations.
In years past, Ron, what would you see the role of IGEA and the role of GDAA, and how does that change now that you're one body?
I think, if we go back 10 or 15 years, both kicking off as trade associations, it was really clear. GDAA represented game developers, and that was very clear who they were. And IGEA at that time pretty much represented publishers and distributors and platform holders, and that was very clear. There was this very delineation between what we all did. We had different parts of the market that we looked after. Probably over the last 5 or 10 years, what we've seen is that shift between, well, who are platform holders? Apple's a platform holder, but they're not really like PlayStation. Who are the publishers? Well, you've got like Ubisoft and an Activision, but we actually got Australian companies who publish games, but they're also developers. People like what turned out to be Fire Monkeys, who are an EA studio, so they belong to a publisher, but they came from the development world. And what happened is we had this big mix-up. It started to become more and more blurred about who looked after who. And it became very different or very difficult then to kind of separate whose turf was who. And we did work really closely together to try to make sure that we didn't fall over each other's turf. And I guess what ended up happening, we saw the GDAA on the states and the incentives and the funding and the engagement with the states and territories, and largely around Victoria. Then we had IGEA working pretty much at a Commonwealth level, so doing a lot of the government-facing work in Canberra. But again, all that started to morph as well. So I think it just became obvious over a number of years that we were vying for the same members, and we were vying for the same attention from politicians and policymakers and bureaucrats and everybody else. It just became obvious that we should be one family, I guess.
Was that a challenge then, I guess, talking about, having those two bodies representative, not sort of appearing that the games industry was all on the same page when you're talking to some of these industry bodies, through governments to ministers, all of that sort of thing?
Look, I think there's always going to be a clash. There's always going to be somewhere where there's a bit of tension. But I think we were lucky enough that both associations shared members. Both associations, the heads of both associations. So I guess myself throughout that whole period, and back then was Tony Reid from the GDAA. We'd worked together many years ago, so we've known each other for 20 years, which made it easy for us to jump on the phone and go, actually, where are we going to land on this issue? Who's going to front this issue? Is there any tension here? How are we going to sort through it? So yeah, look, there was times we tripped over each other, but generally that tripping over each other was, at least we're running down the same path. We weren't kind of going in opposite directions.
Now that the GDAA or GDAA are now part of one organisation, they also run GCAP, which is one of the big conventions, and the arcade in Melbourne. What does that change for IGEA to have these two big, I guess, rather than being sort of from the almost like the industry representative and lobbying sort of perspective only, but now actually having to run a space and a convention?
It's incredibly exciting. Like the team, the IGEA team, and I'm just kind of putting the GDAA guys aside for the moment. So the pre-merger IGEA team is incredibly excited about it. Our board are incredibly excited as well. That's why we've gone down this path. Yeah, look, it will be a challenge. It's not something that we're good at, and this is what we kind of acknowledged over a number of years. We didn't try to be put on a show as IGEA. That's what the GDAA were really good at. They were great at running the arcade. The arcade's not changing. The same team who run the last week are running the arcade next week. There's no difference there. GCAP, we're largely, where we can, using the team that the people who in the past run GCAP are helping us run GCAP moving forward. We've attended GCAP every year for the last 10 years. We've been sponsors for 10 years. We've been actually actively engaged with the GDAA around content over those 10 years. So it's going to be new to us, but it's going to have a familiar feel for us. And, we're looking to the people who'd run it in the past to ensure they keep us honest and help us deliver what we hope is a continually better show based on the learnings and the foundations of the GDAA.
On that, with those two big assets that you now run, you said you've got a lot of the same team there that are involved in that, who've been running in the past, so people can expect a sort of continuity of the way that it's all been going. But I'm wondering, does it change the way, when you have presented to Parliament, to state governments all around the country, does it change that position now that you do actually operate this big convention and you operate a co-working space as well?
Yeah, I think it will. Both of those for sure. The first step is going with a single. So even though we've been able to go to government before and say, you know what, hand on heart, we are speaking for the whole industry, understanding that there's another trade association. So the first big step for us is saying, you know what, we are the body representing the whole video game industry, which includes publishers, developers, distributors. So that's the first great thing to be able to say. The government aren't looking around saying, well, where's the other voice? Is there another voice? Are you sure you're speaking for them? It's incredible when you can turn up or bring a politician, I should say, or stakeholders to the arcade and show them what the arcade looks like and show them the vibrancy of the video game industry, show them the width of product that's in there. So, for us, that's a fabulous asset. And of course, GCAP is GCAP. It's enormous. Last year was the first year that we got every state and territory's screen industry to turn up for a meeting at GCAP, which was fantastic. And we hope to continue that this year. We already heard from most of the states and territories that are really excited to come along again.
Thanks for watching Pixel Sift. If you're just joining me, we are talking to Ron Curry, who is the CEO of Interactive Games and Entertainment Association. Ron, are there any plans that the arcade could be rolled out interstate?
Possibly. It's not something that we've discussed at all. One of our commitments was when taking over the arcade that for at least 6 months, the arcade anything with it, apart from support it as best we can and support the team there. We didn't take over the arcade with a plan to expand, nor did we take over the arcade with a plan to get rid of it. The arcade is kind of iconic, and it stands alone. We'll see what the future holds. Currently it's not part of our thinking.
And just moving towards the future, I would be remiss not to mention COVID-19, and we're expecting a pretty rocky economic time within the next 6 months. Ron, how do you think the industry will be affected? Do you think that we'll see game sales rise as people are in self-isolation, or do you think it'll be more of a challenge?
I think there's a bit of both in there. I think we will see games rise. I think it'd be foolish to say we won't. We've seen Netflix increase. We'll see games increase. I mean, people will be looking for ways to entertain themselves and relieve boredom and connect. I mean, the amazing thing about a game is that not only are you engaging with the content, that you're connecting with somebody. And that's, as we're all in, I spent the whole day, 2 days now working at home. I was desperate to connect with somebody during the day, whether it's, on Discord or Skype or a telephone call. So I think we're going to see more. We're also going to see the challenge of, I guess, from a creative point of view, is we've got the teams now. We have an industry that's very good at working remotely, but not everybody is very good at that. So it's getting teams to learn how they go through that whole production process when they're disjointed and when they're away from each other. And that might not be so hard if you've got a 3 or 4 or 5 or 15 person studio. Might be a bit hard if you're EA Vancouver and you've got 3,000 people working from home and trying to bring them all together. So I think for some people, maybe for some indie developers, some good opportunity here because they're agile and they're nimble and they're used to delivering, quickly and used to delivering content from a number of different points, bringing it all together. For the larger publishers, it may be a little bit more difficult.
Ron, the last time we had a large sort of financial downturn was 2008. After the financial crisis then. It's looking like the COVID-19 crisis could be equal to that or worse. And as a consequence of that, we saw a number of the Australian branches of these international developers and publishers close up shop. Are you worried that could happen again? We've recently had Sledgehammer Games open in Melbourne. Is there a risk that could not continue on?
Yeah, look, I think the whole industry learned a lot from the GFC. And I think as larger studios have opened in Australia, they've opened under a different premise. It's not just these cheap work for hire businesses that we saw in the last round, where it was easy to up stumps and move on. We're also seeing that games are created slightly different. So, if you look at perhaps Fire Monkeys, for example, the amount of work they do around real racing, the game just continues to sell because it's not this product now that has a start and has an end. When it has an end, we close the studio and move on. That's not how games are done anymore. We've got these games as a service, which requires these studios who are staffed up, who are have the expertise to continue to deliver that content. So I think a number of things have changed. The business models have changed. The way games are created have changed. The way we manage studios have changed, and certainly the experience of those who are running the studios. Particularly in Australia, they know what's happened in the past, and I can't see us going back down that path, I hope.
Yeah. On a lighter note, with games like Untitled Goose Game receiving the IGF award and global recognition, Ron, what are you most excited for to see where the Australian games industry ends up in the next decade?
I got two visions there, and that's that we'll continue to have fabulous Goose Game like Hollow Knight and those sort of indie games that just explode and successful. But what I'd also like to see is an industry that can stand up and compare itself to Canada, for example. Canada has 27,000 game developers. Why have we got 1,500 and they got 27,000? What I want us, in 10 years' time to say, you know what? Look at our industry now. We have a great amount of AAA studios. We've got really solid indie studios. We've got some great 50-person studios. We're a mature, thriving, competitive industry that really holds our own against the rest of the globe. That relies on a lot of support from government, or some support from government, relies on support from the states. It relies on, some investors being more attracted to what's happening in Australia. But that's my vision. That's what I'm aiming for the next 10 years.
How much support do you need?
Yeah, look, if we look at the incentives that are in place, so if I'm a AAA game studio and I want to open in Australia, what I do is I look around and go, what does it cost me to open in Australia? It costs blah. What does it cost to open in Norway? Oh, it's 30% cheaper. All right, let's do Norway. Oh, Indonesia's 30% cheaper, because these incentives that are in place. What it needs is the government to look at those incentives and start creating an environment that is similar to other countries or provinces, if we look at Canada, but then understanding the return on investment they're getting on that. We know in the UK, the amount of money that's invested in industry by the government is far less than what they get back in return in taxes, in revenue, and that's before we start talking about infrastructure and jobs and payroll tax and all that sort of stuff. The government could be creating a lot more taxable income, and also getting in with an industry that, we're a weightless, what we call a weightless export. You don't dig us up, you don't put us on a truck, you don't put us on on a ship. It's weightless. It's good for the environment. It's easy. It rolls out. It's scalable. We just got to get our federal government over the line on this.
In either case, I'm very, very excited to see what ends up happening in the Australian games industry and how we end up growing this as we go on. And that's about all the time that we have for today. Thank you for watching or listening to episode 142 of Pixel Sift. This episode has been hosted by myself and Gianni. Thanks for joining me tonight, Gianni.
Thank you, Daniel.
And thank you, Ron Curry, for taking the time to be on our show tonight.
No worries. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Gianni.
Pixel Sift is produced by Scott Quigg, Sarah Ireland, Fiona Bartholomeus, Mitch Lowe, myself, and Gianni Di Giovanni is our executive producer. We wouldn't have been able to make 142 episodes of Pixel Sift if we didn't have the support of Murdoch University, so please go and check them out and tell them that we sent you. If you're keen to learn more about a great creative degree, head to murdoch.edu.au/arts. That's murdoch.edu.au/arts. As always, we'll be sticking links to topics we talked about in the show notes on our website. You can go and check that out on www.pixelsift.com.au.
And you can come join us on Discord. We'd love to have you there. That's pixelsift.com.au/Discord. Where you can share your creative work. You can talk about topics and games and anything else. That's pixelsift.com.au/Discord. And if you like what we do, can we ask you a favor? We need your help to share the show. So tell a friend, tell your mate, tell your brothers and sisters, and start someone's journey into podcasts, because we hope that you like what we do, and we hope that you have friends who like what we do too, and you can share our work with them.
Our next episode will be recorded live on twitch.tv/pixelsift on Thursday, the 2nd of April at 8:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time, so please come down and join us and be part of the episode. Next week on Thursday, the 26th of March, it'll be Pixelsift Plays, where we play some of the indie games that feature on our show. That's all for this week. Thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.